Good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock, so we'll make a start if that's all right. Welcome to the meeting of the Thirsk and Malton Area Planning Committee today on the 15th of May. Today's meeting is being recorded and filmed and will be made publicly available on the website. Please ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on silent. Toilets are located in the corridor. I have not been made aware that we're expecting a fire alarm practice this morning, so if the alarm does sound, please leave by one of the emergency exits, either at the back or behind me, and gather in the car park at the front of the offices. Are we using it? Oh, no, sorry. Sorry. So I just also need to remind members, as of yesterday, up to the 19th of June, that we are in a pre-election period with the Eastfield by-election going to be held on the 19th of June. Now, whilst the business of council continues, we do need to be mindful of avoiding giving an individual or a group a platform by which they can influence public opinion in the lead up to the election. So please, can I ask all members that they are mindful of this during today's proceedings. So turning to the agenda now, I think that's everything. Nikki, we won't have had any apologies for absence because we're all here. So that's very good. Members, minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments about the minutes from the last meeting? Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Thank you. And are we happy to accept it by general affirmation? Yeah, thank you. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Oh, thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda, we now come to the main matters on the agenda, is an application number 23-00001/MOUT. This is a hybrid planning application comprising of one, outline planning application for residential planning permission for up to 50 dwellings with associated open space. Yeah. All matters are reserved. Item 2 on the application is outline planning application for mixed use development for commercial, industrial and storage uses, all matters reserved. The total area is 3.12 hectares on land south of Rickle Drive, Helmsley, on behalf of Northminster Land Limited. We have speakers on this matter. The speaking time has been increased from previously from 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and I will ask you to come forward at the most appropriate time. The officer presenting the case is Mr. Alan Goforth, and I'm going to ask Alan to come in now and begin his presentation. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Item 4 is on page 7 of the agenda. The application is reported to committee because it is considered that it raises significant planning issues. The applicant appealed the application for non-determination in March of this year, and therefore the purpose of this report is to seek to resolve the position of the council that it will take at an upcoming appeal against non-determination. So essentially it is to establish the decision the committee would have been minded to reach had the matter remained with the LPA for a decision. The final decision now rests with the Planning Inspectorate, with a hearing scheduled for the 15th of July of this year. The location and arrangements for that hearing will be confirmed in due course. There are no updates to the report as published. So I'll move on to a presentation just to illustrate the site with a number of site photographs. So the first slide is just outlining the extent of the application site, which amounts to 3.2 hectares. So the site is at the southeastern corner of Helmsley, and in terms of adjacent land uses, there is the industrial premises on Sawmill Lane to the west and the recent residential development on Rickle Drive to the north. So members obviously aware that there wasn't a site visit for this particular item, but will be familiar in terms of the location, given the recent site visit for the application for the National Park offices. Just moving on to the next slide. So this outlines the application site in relation to the allocations within the Helmsley plan. So the application site encompasses two allocations, which is EMP2 for employment purposes and 174 for residential purposes. In terms of the site constraints, it does fall within an area that's been allocated as a high landscape for high landscape value, but it is within development limits of Helmsley, which is identified as a local service centre. In terms of the surrounding area, there's a public right-of-way that runs to the east and south of the application site, and on the eastern boundary is Spittlebeck, which also runs to the east of the existing residential development to the north, which is shown on that plan as Site 183. So moving on to the next slide, please. So just an aerial photo, again, just to illustrate the context of the site. You can see to the west the existing industrial premises on Sawmill Lane, the new housing to the north on Rickle Drive, which has been constructed in the last 5 years. And then obviously to the east and south is open agricultural land. The site at present is agricultural grazing land and is relatively level. So moving on to the next slide. So again, just a close-up aerial photo of the application site. To the north, you can see Rickle Drive, which curves southward towards the northern boundary of the application site. Those properties comprise those which front Rickle Drive and the cul-de-sacs of Rye Mount Crescent and Rosedale Lane. With Rosedale Lane, there's a number of properties which back on to or are sideways onto the northern part of the proposed residential development. So again, just illustrating the positions of the neighbouring industrial use, the site which is the subject of the application for the National Park offices, and also the route of the public right-of-way is shown on that aerial photo. So this is a plan which is taken from the application submission. This is only an indicative plan, so it wouldn't form part of any approved documents list. This is on page 65 of the agenda, but has also been circulated in hard copy this morning. The main point of this is to illustrate the broad zoning of the land uses. So the residential on the right-hand side, the employment use on the left-hand side, and that is something that we would obviously look to secure as part of the permission. In terms of the actual layout of the buildings and roadways, that's all indicative at this moment, given that all matters are reserved, including the access to the site. So the residential proposal is for a maximum of 50 dwellings. The employment is for 3,513 square metres, is what could be accommodated within the western half of the site. So those employment uses, as explained in the report, they would comprise B2 general industrial, B8 storage and distribution, and subclasses of use class E. So that's subclasses C to G, which is set out in full in the report. So it's moving on to the next slide. Thanks, Nikki. So this again is just indicative drawings included within the papers circulated this morning. So just to show the broad zoning of the use classes, particularly in the employment land half of the site. So the intention would be to have the use class E to the road frontage, with the general industrial and storage and distribution towards the western part of the site, which obviously backs onto the existing industrial uses on Sawmill Lane. Again, this is showing the existing infrastructure in the area, which comprises surface water, sewer and a public rising main. That's shown in the plan in the left-hand bottom corner. And up in the right-hand top corner, again, is just indicative areas of landscaping and public open space. So the next slide, just moving on to photographs at the entrance to the site. So this is taken facing south along Rickle Drive. towards the northern boundary of the application site. So on the left-hand side of the new build properties, which were brought forward in the first phase of housing development off Rickle Drive. And the next photo is panning round to the right of where I was stood. So this is facing into Storey Close. So these properties, I understand, were built in the 1990s. Red brick. I mean, you can see quite a regimented design and appearance. So as you can see in the area, it's generally two-storey residential development adjacent to the site. This is facing into Rosedale Lane, so the properties on the right-hand side are those which would be closest to the application site. So these would back onto the proposed residential development. So as you can see, they're orientated to face west or to face north, so away from the application site. Yep, so this slide is just a close-up of the existing roadway as it leads towards the northern boundary. As you can see, there's an existing field gate providing access, and there are footpaths on either side of the road. So it has been designed to provide connectivity into this allocated site. And the next slide, please, Nikki. Again, just a close-up of that entrance. And you can see it's relatively level grassland, which has been used for grazing most recently. So this photo is taken facing east across the back of the properties on Rosedale Lane. So again, the ones that are closest to the application site. And then just panning round in the next slide, just showing the eastern boundary with the beck and the public right of way. So there is a degree of planting as existing along that boundary, which does screen some of the views towards the site from the public right of way. And the next slide is just panning round, facing southwest, so towards Sawmill Lane. And you can see the overhead power lines that are referred to in the report crossing the site. And now panning round to face west, you can see the industrial buildings on Sawmill Lane, and in the foreground is the site which forms part of the North York Moors offices proposal. So at this point we're back on Rickle Drive facing north, away from the application site. Again, just illustrating the existing roadways, footpaths, the driveways that are accessed onto the road, and the general sort of scale and appearance of neighbouring residential development. So at this point we're on the public footpath on the eastern side of the application site, or to the northeast of the application site. So this is just to illustrate the existing footbridge which connects to Rye Mount Crescent, which would be used by occupants of the proposed development site. So this slide is taken from further south along the public right of way, just an opening within the existing planting where you can see the back of the properties on Rosedale Lane. So they would be adjacent to the new residential development. And the next slide is panning round, facing west across the application site from the public footpath. So in the background you can see the outline of the existing industrial and warehouse buildings to the west of the application site. This photo is taken facing north from the public footpath towards the back of the dwellings on Rosedale Lane. Again, just showing the general sort of density and scale and appearance of those dwellings. And the final slide is taken from the public right-of-way on the southern side of the site. So this photo is actually, in terms of it's been taken at a height above eye level. So this isn't actually illustrative of the view that's available from the public footpath, because I think the hedge and the change in level, it isn't actually possible to see those existing properties from that footpath. So that's just an indication of those properties over that distance. Okay, I think it might be worthwhile just heading back to one of the aerial photos, Vicky, if that's okay. Thank you. The other one, please. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the report itself, the principle of employment and residential development in this location is supported by the Helmsley Local Plan, which allocates the western part of the site for employment purposes and the eastern part of the site for up to 50 dwellings. It is considered that the proposal aligns with the allocation and the principle of the development is considered to be acceptable. The report sets out the main considerations for members to consider before reaching a conclusion on what decision they would have taken had the matter remained with the LPA. The report summarises local concerns and objections, which primarily relate to the principle of development, highways safety and capacity, and residential amenity. The conditions and reserve matters will secure appropriate zoning of development, scale and density parameters, a requirement for a central buffer between the land uses, and also noise impact assessments and mitigation as the plots for the employment land and residential use are brought forward. In terms of the main benefits of the proposal, they can be summarised as being that the site would provide the bulk of employment land allocated within the Helmsley Plan. It would provide a welcome contribution to housing supply. It would provide a policy compliant level of affordable housing secured by legal agreement, along with provision of public open space and connections to nearby public rights of way. In addition, there would be biodiversity net gain provided and a funding provided through the community infrastructure levy. But clearly there is a degree of risk and uncertainty given the outline and hybrid nature of the application, and that is in relation to concerns raised primarily for highways impact and residential amenity. There have been no objections raised by technical consultees in relation to highways, drainage, residential amenity or the environment. With the application being made in outline, there is significant detail that remains to be assessed and agreed at reserve matters stage, and as a result, any grant of permission issued by the Planning Inspectorate would need to be accompanied by a robust list of conditions. In the officer's opinion, these should cover the various scenarios on how the site may be brought forward. Ultimately, if permission is granted, it would be for the planning inspector to impose conditions, but the LPA will have input on those conditions as part of the appeals process and specifically during the hearing. In conclusion, the starting point for the decision maker is the development plan. The development aligns with the allocation set out in the Helmsley Plan. Officers have weighed the potential harms against the benefits, and in conclusion, it's recommended that Planning Committee resolve that had the LPA determined the application, it would have granted permission subject to the 66 conditions listed at the end of the report and the prior completion of a Section 106 agreement as detailed in Table 1 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alan. Right, that was the officer's report. I'm now going to ask the speakers to come forward. We have the objector, the division representative and the agent. So, Mr. Skeen, if you would like to come forward to present your petition, it's the green button on the keypad, and you have 5 minutes, Mr. Skeen.
Am I there? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. The concerns and fears of over 100 local residents are contained on the public file, and I hope you've had the opportunity to read these. But I want to concentrate on what I and many others see as the greatest concern, and that is the potential impact of the type and volume of traffic using the only access, which is effectively a residential street for much of its length. The reason these seats aren't full of objectors is that they have lost faith in this process. They observed the consideration of the National Park application, where the principal safety concerns were effectively dismissed. The decision to approve frankly appalled us, Consider then how we felt when, purely by chance, we actually read the Bowman-Lyons report, which was the seed report for the plan as it was approved for South East Helmsley. This is South East Helmsley. And signposted in each of the plan site briefs. This report attended directly to the specific safety issues that we'd been raising throughout. It makes specific recommendations designed to allow mixed development but protect the housing. The 2017 approval of Rymore Gardens scheme design, it turns out, was directly contrary to the BL recommendations. There was no reference to the BL in the officer report to that meeting, nor indeed was there any evidence that committee members had been made aware of it. Jump forward to 2023 and this hybrid application. No hint of Bowman-Lyons until its discovery by us. Onto the approval of the National Park site. The same detailed arguments again, including the potential risks surrounding the many direct vehicle accesses from residential units. Again, no mention of Bowman-Lyons. The briefs also require that development should be coordinated with adjacent sites. The officer supervising the Rymore Gardens application noted that coordination attempts had failed. There was disagreement and objection involving the owner and agent of the site to the south, this site, but no explanation. On the National Park application, the officer advised that there was no need for a coordination, and much of the same is said in this report. In fact, the lack of coordination at first stage of the Rymore Gardens application, specifically in terms of layout design, as it connected to the access road, effectively failed the remainder of the process. This was in the context of the forward impact, a horrendous mistake. As the site now stands, apart from a badly engineered 80-degree bend, the traffic type and volume does not present any particular danger. The imposition of the National Park traffic, and God forbid the volume and type of traffic that this proposal will generate, changes all of that. Big question is, how did that information remain undisclosed? Was it serially missed by chance, negligence, or incompetence? Was it seen but deliberately not broadcast? Was it some sort of collaborative arrangement? Whatever the cause, the information remained buried. Irrespective of the outcome of this application, it is essential in the public interest that the non-disclosure of this information throughout the process be independently investigated. Since the discovery, the officer supervising the National Park application has deemed the BL report not policy and therefore not relevant. How could specific safety recommendations from experts hired and approved by this council be deemed not policy in any context? I hope we could all agree that health and safety will always rank highest in any consideration. We feel for the officer presenting this report. We believe is constrained principally by the gross error of the Rymore Gardens approval. Sadly, this error was compounded by the National Park approval, and perhaps it's better that the inspector will shoulder the burden of the decision. It has to be conceded that committee members in each case were given no chance to consider all sides of the argument. They weren't given the information. The suppression or dismissal of the BL evidence is inexplicable. Hence why people have lost faith in the process. Frankly, we welcome the intervention of the inspector, who we trust will listen to all sides on this matter. So I'd say to you, please do not set out to defend the indefensible at this hearing. The error of the Rymore Gardens approval must be owned up to, and it can't be physically redeemed. So
Mr. Gay, can we wrap it up? You
the
well
whole
beyond your
plan
5 minutes.
needs to be rethought. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Grateful.
Sorry. The next speaker is Councillor George Jabor, who is the Division Councillor for Helmsley. Councillor Jabor, you have got 5 minutes. I will try and remember to give you a 30-second warning before the end.
Thank you, Chair. This is the third time I speak in front of this committee about a planning application affecting this part of Helmsley. As I mentioned to you before, it is very rare for a councillor and a community to argue for more houses in their own backyards. However, this is one of those occasions. The reason why we are in this situation is because of the Helmsley local plan that was devised about a decade ago. At the time the plan was introduced, a commercial and industrial element was added to it, was added to a quiet residential area in Helmsley. This was before COVID and before the change to working habits, when many people, including Helmsley town councillors, determined that having an allocation in the local plan of Helmsley to commercial and industrial units would lead to economic benefits. Over the past few years, things have changed significantly. There is now plenty of empty commercial and industrial units in Helmsley that are not being used. This has prompted Helmsley Town Council themselves to change their position about the planning application. As you can see in the report, they have submitted an objection. It's clear that we are in this situation because the local plan of 10 years ago does the needs of the community and the residents today. Helmsley is desperate to have more housing, not more commercial and industrial units. If this planning application is approved by the planning inspector, we are losing a significant opportunity to build more houses that are desperately needed, not only in Helmsley and North Yorkshire, but also in the whole country. And you can see from the recommendations of from the report of the officers that there are a number of concerns that they have. The change to the character of the area, the proximity of the commercial and industrial units to the residential houses, the lack of details in the outline application, and which also would lead to lack of assurance that the policies and the planning and the planning guidelines will be complied with. Lack of assurance whether the policies and guidelines will be complied with. Therefore, I hope that this committee today will explore the tools that it has within its disposal to articulate a position that it can communicate to the planning inspector to increase the likelihood that this whole site is residential rather than a combination of residential and industrial and commercial. Finally, the planning inspectorate agreed that the determination of this application is via public hearing on 15th of July 2025. I would like to request that that hearing takes place in Helmsley. There is a significant public interest in this application. The report states that the application raises significant planning issues such that it is in the public interest for the application to be brought to the committee today. I would argue that that same reason would also justify the hearing to be held in Helmsley to enable as many residents as possible to engage with this process. There was an email sent yesterday from Rymore Garden Residents Association Committee to councillors. It was actually sent just before midnight. So no one expects that councillors would have read it within such a short time frame. So I'm going to use time that is left for me to summarize what they have said. They said that they are not commenting on the housing aspects of this application, but would ask councillors to reject the commercial elements. They said that the applicant has provided no evidence of additional demand for new commercial premises in Helmsley. And they saying that there are a significant number of vacant units that exist on Sawmill Lane. They understand there has been virtually no response to the applicant's advertisement for the proposed commercial development. They are also asking that if the council is minded to approve the commercial element at outline stage, it should place a condition on the applicant to carry out a viability assessment for commercial premises in Helmsley in order to establish whether any demand is required. And they question the consistency and weight of the Helmsley local plan and say that this is the Rickle Drive area is a de facto residential area and the council planning assumptions should recognize this reality. Thank you very much indeed for allowing me to make my statement and summarize the statement of the residents. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Jabbar. The final speaker is Catherine Dukes. Miss Dukes, if you'd like to come forward, it's the green button on the microphone. You've got 5 minutes. I will try and give you a warning at 30 seconds remaining. Thank you.
Good morning. The application was submitted in December 2022, and so after 2 years and 5 months, we're pleased to see in writing the officers were in as good as their word in recommended approval for the application to Planning Committee. Knowing officers support the application meant appealing against non-determination was a decision that was not taken lightly, but we had no choice given there appeared to be... Is it on? It is lit up, yeah. Can you hear me now? Right. Sorry. Knowing officers support, I can hear now. Knowing officers support the application meant appealing against non-determination was a decision that was not taken lightly, but we had no choice given there appeared to be no end to the process because of the endless questions and concerns from consultees in relation to what should be reserved matters. The site is allocated within the Helmsley local plan for the nature and amount of development being proposed. The intention of submitting an outline application was therefore simply to confirm that the principal development is acceptable and to gain an understanding of the planning obligations. At this stage, there is no legislative requirement for technical matters to be addressed or a detailed design to be offered. To be clear, we have engaged with the community and interested parties, including North York Moors National Park Authority, both before and during the application process. There's also been ample opportunity for comments, which is evident from the multiple comments made from the same parties. Alongside housing and job opportunities, the allocation is expected to secure affordable housing, live-work units, open space and a children's play area. These are policy requirements that form part of the scheme. The road serving the application site was designed to accommodate the amount and type of development that is in front of you. We're not proposing development that requires the design of the road to be altered, which includes to accommodate cycling. This is because the road is already built to North Yorkshire's highway standards. Residential amenity of existing residents to the north of the allocation can and will be protected by way of planning conditions. We understand comments have suggested that the whole allocation should be for residential developments. However, the site is allocated for both employment and housing development because where houses are built, then jobs also need to be provided. If an application for just housing were to be submitted, then it would be contrary to the statutory development plan, and the expectation would be for the council to refuse permission. If there is a desire for a different scheme to the one that is subject to this application, then the Helmsley local plan would need to be revised through the statutory development plan process. Such matters are not for this application. One matter that should, however, be for consideration through this application process and at committee day is that the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable sites. In reading the officer's report, we're surprised to see there's no mention how there is only a 0.8-year land supply for the legacy Rydal area and that North Yorkshire has only 3 years supply of deliverable sites. The critical nature of the land supply is a material consideration that national policy directs is to be given significant weight. Coupled with the site being allocated and therefore forming part of the land supply, along with how the application scheme is policy compliant, means there is no basis for the application to be refused permission. The balance of the planning judgment tips heavily in favour of the application. I appreciate I have 5 minutes in which to speak, but there is no reason to say anything more, given that the Planning Committee has simply been asked to offer an opinion as to whether the application would have been approved if Council had been given the opportunity to determine the application. I therefore encourage members to use the opportunity to offer support for the development and possibly offer comments on the conditions, which will be the focus of the appeal process in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do officers want to respond to any of the matters raised?
So I suppose a couple of things. I'll pick up on Councillor Jabbor's comments first with regard to the process of the hearing, if that's okay. So the hearing process in terms of the opportunity to speak, the opportunity to engage in that process is fairly straightforward. It's much simpler than a public inquiry or something of that nature, whereby members of the public are able to make representation to the hearing. It's a guided conversation effectively from the planning inspector. They will break up the day into, or possibly 2 days, into topic areas, and the council will be involved in part of that. Clearly, third parties are also able to make representation to that process. So going back a little bit of a step, so the information that's been provided already to date in representations will be available for the inspector. So there's no necessity, if you will, to repeat all of those comments that were made previously. Clearly, if one wishes to do so, then that's absolutely fine. If there are any additional comments to be made by third parties, then again, they can make direct representation to the planning inspector for that process. They can also, and there's no requirement to have that information up front in writing, but they can also make representation directly to the hearing, and the inspector will provide opportunities throughout that process to make verbal presentation to the hearing. Moving on, the Bowman Lyons report, and I've got sections of it set out in front of me, and I appreciate the email that was sent around last night effectively does exactly what I'm about to do. The first part of that is the Bowman Lyons report, in my view, does not form part of the policy itself. It is a supporting document that was prepared in support of the preparation of the local plan. Clearly, it is referenced in the supporting text in the plan, but doesn't set out, for example, in terms of particularly, obviously, the discussion today has been around the access. It doesn't set out in the policy a requirement to fulfill all of the suggested opportunities that are set out in the Bowman Lyons report. And I quote from the Bowman Lyons report. So it sets out various things around road links. So limited access, I need my glasses, sorry. Limited access options to Helmsley Southeast site represent the largest constraint on the nature of its development and will lead to a level of compromise from what might be deemed the ideal situation. It then effectively goes through the sort of roads hierarchy, if you will, and sets out these suggestions in order to create the best solution that is possible on this site. And certainly it sets out that the primary access to serve Helmsley should be Rickle Drive. Until it splits into the employment and residential zones, it should be treated as a mixed distributor road. It then discusses the issues that have been set out to you this morning around not having direct residential driveways from a distributor road. And clearly that's a thing that we've done in the past and we'll do in the future. We have a situation here today whereby there is an existing development on site. So the assessment that's being carried out as a result is one of safety. Bearing in mind, the MPPF requirements are only to refuse a planning application where the impact on highway safety is severe. It doesn't then quantify what severe means, but sets out that bar as severe. So the question to our consultees in the Local Highways Authority is whether or not this proposed development, in terms of its scale, form and function, fulfills those requirements in terms of safety. And the view that's been taken is, and as you've heard from the officer report, the view that's been taken is that the road that's been built to date is of a suitable size, radius, etc., to fulfill those requirements of safety, and the Highway Authority has not raised issues of concern around the number or location of those residential drives onto the first part of the road access into the site. So from our perspective, whilst clearly there is always, if you will, a perfect scenario, whilst I would certainly agree that the suggestions set out in the Bowman Lyons report are not fulfilled by the existing development of housing in that locality, that we still have a situation whereby we have a plan that supports further development in this location, and we have a consultee response that states that this proposal is safe in terms of the MPPF and the highways requirements. I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on that basis? Is there anything in the Beaumont Lyons report that would change the allocation of mixed use commercial and residential land? Is there any suggestion that it should all be residential? It's not before us. I don't believe we can consider it because it's not part of this application.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, in as much as the Beaumont Lyons report sets out in the preamble in the first part of the report a number of options. So bearing in mind this report was put together in order to inform the then development of the local plan. It looks, as I say, at a number of different options. It in no way would give weight to, in my view, it would in no way give weight to, at this stage, looking at alternative options for the site as a whole. Now, clearly, we do have, we do get applications for development which is contrary to the local plan requirements, and we look to developers in those situations to justify that. So the MPPF allows for alternative uses of allocated sites where they cannot be delivered. So we look for marketing information, demand locally. They'll submit other reports that looked at economic development in that locality. So there is an opportunity for a landowner and or a developer to come to the LPA with justification for moving to an alternative site, or excuse me, an alternative use. That's not the case today. So we have an applicant who is submitting an application for a specific use. The local plan, in my view, and certainly nor the Beaumont Lyons report, would in and of itself provide that justification.
Members, I'll open it up for questions from members now. Okay. Now, my understanding is we're not here to make a determination because it's no longer in our gift. It's now in the gift of the planning inspectorate. So what you need from us is some direction as to whether we think, if it's allowed, the conditions are sufficient to allow for development. Is that what we are doing? And whether we would have said yes or no if it had been brought properly to committee.
Okay, so from that perspective, in my view, you have a number of options. Clearly, if we're looking for a steer in terms of how we approach the appeal. If there are matters that you consider are problematic, then we need to understand those. We then need to understand whether or not they would have otherwise formed a reason for refusal, or whether they're matters that we'll take back in support of our discussions particularly around conditions. So, I mean, often in these scenarios, we'll spend a fairly significant time in the appeal hearing going through the details of a condition. Normally, whilst we do have those discussions with an applicant, normally they are effectively, officer penned, and the applicant effectively gets those conditions. Not quite the same in an appeal process. The inspector will apply their view to it at the end of the day, but there is an opportunity for each and every condition that's been put forward to be discussed. So the applicant gets a direct, not a say particularly, but certainly an opportunity to comment on the ability to comply with the legislation, the ability for them to implement, or the enforceability of that condition, or however it might be. So that discussion would take place. So I suppose from that point of view, you have a set of conditions that I think we've penned in this case, draft conditions. So the question to you would be on that particular topic, whether or not you consider those to be sufficiently robust to do that which we say they're there to do.
one more question. Sorry, one more question, and then I'll shut up. The inspector has at his discretion an ability to not uphold all of the appeal, but only uphold part of the appeal. But that's not something that we can influence, really, is it?
Is it something that you can influence? Certainly, it's something that you can put forward. You know, if you had a particular issue around part of the site or part of the development from that point of view, one could put forward that view. Absolutely. We're here for you to air your air any issues, frankly, that you have in those terms. Clearly, we're not going to be in a position at the end of today with sufficient, if you will, detail on any of those matters. It will be for officers to take those matters away, to consider them and consider how we would then present or defend those positions. It may be that we come to some conclusion whereby we would need other third-party evidence, and certainly, in my past history, I've gone to a third-party consultant to look at highways matters in order to support members' concerns on a particular issue where they've not been in agreement with the local highway authority. So there are those other possibilities, and certainly, in those circumstances, I would suggest that we would take those matters away, consider them, and we would probably come back to you, Councillor Goodrick, to sort of set out where we think we would then go with that matter in order that officers were correctly defending members' position from that perspective.
Right, I'll shut up now. Councillor Napton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the excellent report and overview. I think what we're looking at is the harm versus benefit of this proposal. Now, the mistake that was made by Rydale District Council, in my mind, was to allow residential driveways onto what they knew was going to be a mixed distributor road, because that was quite clear at that point in time, in my opinion, that that would be the usage of this road. And once that had been allowed, it made the commercial zoning of this untenable, because what you're going to have is HGVs driving up a road where residents are backing out, and because we all drive into our driveways and back out of our driveways, backing out in front of HGVs. Completely unacceptable. And it didn't have to be this way, because if those developments have been designed like the development which is in front of us, the residential which is in front of us today, where you've got no driveways feeding off this central road, then that would have been, in my mind, acceptable. But once that had been done, I believe that then this was now untenable. So I would, and if we're thinking about, it's hard to express this because obviously we're in a position where we're not approving or think, but let's pretend we're approving or refusing this application. I mean, I would be in support of the residential section of this because it clearly has no driveways onto the central road. That's exactly how it should be. But I would not support in any way the industrial side of this, because you've now got effectively an industrial site with industrial vehicles, HGVs, etc., driving through what Rydale District Council made into a street. I think one of the objectors said a street. We made that link road into a residential street, and that's the problem. And that's the problem. That's why I would say we should refuse this application, or we should have refused this application. Now, if we can give anything to the inspector, I would say because of that error, it has now made this ideal for more residential, and therefore the entirety of this should now be residential because of that initial error. I think that's all I want to say, Chairman.
Yep.
Okay, not wish to come back on that as such, but if members are inclined to support that position, then I would suggest that officers would seek third-party consultation response with regards to the highways matters. Effectively at this stage, and bearing in mind the timescales aren't great, but effectively asking that consultant as to whether or not they consider there is an arguable case from a highways professional perspective.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I was on sort of a similar sort of path to Councillor Napton. I was thinking, is it possible for us to say yes to part of this and no to the other part of it, i.e. the commercial part? The other thing I was wondering about was that on one of the plans, the infrastructure plan, it showed a potential road connection to Sawmill Lane. And of course, if that comes about, it could create even more traffic through this estate as a sort of a rat run to avoid the centre of Helmsley. So again, that, whilst it might improve matters, it also might be a detrimental effect on the estate as well. So I tend to agree with Councillor Napton that yes to the residential bit and no to the commercial bit, or find an alternative use for that commercial bit.
Could I suppose ask, is that assumption therefore based only on the highway set, and I'll ask the same question to Councillor Napton, only on the highway safety issues, or are there other matters that you wish for us to consider with regard to the use of the employment land?
So my primary concern, Peter, is about the highway safety, that you've got domestic driveways linked onto a road that is going to be used by HGVs and other such vehicles. So that's a great concern of mine. That could have been dealt with at that stage, but wasn't dealt with, and therefore that's what makes it untenable. I suppose there is another issue as the actual viability, given what the local member said about the need for these sort of units within Helmsley. I'm not privy to that and which units are empty or whatever, but I do think that probably, you know, the viability issue which was touched on. But my primary thing is we have set up this access road to be residential by virtue of putting driveways onto it, and therefore we've made it a residential road. Now we're expecting it to allow HGVs etc. over it, and in my opinion I would never want a residential estate to have HGVs travelling through it by design.
Councillor Burr.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the first thing that I'd like to say is that this is not turning into a blame game of a different council, Councillor Napton, and there are 3 members sat on this committee who were part of the council. I do not think that anybody on this committee actually was on the planning committee, and I would like that. I'm not sure if you were on the committee or Joy was on the committee, but I certainly wasn't. We are where we are, so we have to deal this. I'm very, very disappointed that the applicant have taken this further, because I think that our residents expect a local committee to give their views and their opinions, and it's very important for this process to take place. So we will have our view, and I'm sure we will all have our say. So moving on, we all know that COVID has absolutely changed everything, the way we work, the way we live, and the way we take our enjoyment. And this application is not meeting those needs that have been superseded by COVID, i.e. about the industry, about what's happening in Helmsley.
And we all know, whether we are politicians or whether we are residents, that commercial and housing is not a recipe to success. Unfortunately, we are faced with something that is very, very undesirable. I've always advocated, as you all know, councillors, that we need more houses, more houses, more houses. But unfortunately, this is not the right way to go. I do feel a lot of sympathy for our officers presenting, because I think we're in a catch-22 situation. But I do think we've got to have great sympathy to the residents, to the local member, and to the needs of Helmsley at the moment. And if I was voting on this, I would be voting for what I think is common sense, that we do not want HGVs, lots and lots of people going to work and coming back from work, delivery vans, etc., on what is housing estate. I went down there on Sunday and spent quite a lot of time there, and this is not an area for a commercial estate and a housing estate. So I would not be in support of this particular application, but I would be in support of more housing. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Clearly, there's a historical timeline that goes back with this application, and I wasn't part of Rydale Council. I was part of Hambleton Council, I think, when this kicked off its due process. There's lots of issues that we've heard. Lots of conditions in the report, 66, I think, in total to address the matters. And I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but I do struggle with the fact that highways have deemed this to be a suitable road for their, by their assessment. I mean, we've all had issues, I think, with highways over the years with that, but they are the professional officers who determine whether that road is appropriate. And as the report states, they have deemed that to be suitable. I think we can't avoid the fact that Councillor Burr has alluded to in her presentation that when this report or when this project first commenced, the world was a very different place. Over the last 4 or 5 years, things have changed dramatically. And I know the local plan, the Helmsley, wanted commercial and employment, because employment is important. Housing is very, very important, but employment is also important. It's no good building houses if young people haven't got jobs to work in. So there is a rub there, but it would appear that the demand for, I don't know whether the office can enlighten or if it's even available at this stage as to what type of commercial properties they are. I mean, we know we don't need office space anymore because people aren't working out of offices to the extent they did. So that's a question I have around that, because I can see that circumstances have changed, and there lies the problem. This has gone on for so long that effectively the goalposts have been changed on us. And I agree again with Councillor Burr. I'm agreeing a number of times this morning rather with Councillor Burr, that the officers are in a difficult position, and perversely we are in a difficult position as well, because we've got to give some sort of steer before the matter goes to the inspector. So I'm conflicted. I really am conflicted. I can see both sides of the argument, but we have to give some recommendation, and some recommendation we will give. So I'll give way there to listen to the rest of the debate.
Yeah, I don't know if we find ourselves in a difficult position or otherwise. Clearly, where we have a full application, it is easier to understand the exact implications of a scheme, be they from a landscape point of view, a design point of view, or be they from a position of looking at traffic movements. Clearly, the application is set out effectively for what was B1, B2 and B8 uses previously. So they include sort of small scale industrial units that you would otherwise find acceptable in a residential area. They include the other types of industrial units which would, by virtue of noise, smoke, dust, etc., not be found directly in a residential area, hence the discussions from the environmental health team. clearly we have an application which is put before us in terms of those uses, which are simply looked at across the site as a whole. At reserve matters stage, we would be coming back to those matters, but the assumption would have to be here today that yes, it would generate those sorts of HGV movements that you've discussed, because the nature of the proposal that's in front of us. Again, had that been, you know, only, let's say for sake of argument, only B1 uses, so those sorts of uses that that one might find in a residential area, whilst the expectations may still be that there would be HGV movements associated with them, you could look at those much more specifically in terms of how likely a certain number of HGV movements how likely they would be on a day-to-day basis. In this scenario at the moment, because we've got a much more general breakdown of uses, I think the report that's set out in front of you effectively looks at that as a worst case scenario. And so, yes, there would be an expectation of those uses. I come back to a point I made previously as the discussion very much focusing on the highways and highway safety matters. I certainly think in looking at the appeal, we will go to a third party consultant to look at those matters. Thank you.
Peter, can I ask a question, given the feeling of what I'm picking up around the room? If this had come to us as the planning committee for us to make a decision, would it have been within the committee's gift to have done a partial? We can't do that. Okay.
No, so, and Kelly perhaps will correct me when I'm wrong, but as I understand it, the inspector is at liberty to make a split decision. Bit unusual. The planning committee is not, that's correct.
To clarity to see if that was an option in front of us.
So
Thank you.
I suppose in terms of advising you, is it an option in front of you? It's not an option for the LPA to make a split decision. Clearly we're in an appeal situation and we are wanting to provide information to the appeal inspector in terms of members' position on the proposals that are in front of them. It is perfectly reasonable for us to be saying to the inspector, we have no issues with the housing proposals that have been put before you. We are only concerned about, we could be saying we're only concerned about HGV movements associated with the employment uses. That would be a perfectly reasonable place for us to be. It's for the inspector to consider that impact and make a decision accordingly. They are at liberty to issue a split decision.
Thank you for that. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, it's just a comment, and I think Peter and you have more or less covered that in the last few moments. However, I'm not particularly familiar with Sawmill Lane, but going back to what Councillor Taylor mentioned about the houses backing onto, if they were leaving their houses onto a street where there will be commercial vehicles. Sawmill Lane is at the end of Station Road. It comes down, there's onto that site. I don't know how much it's been developed over the years since it was initially put there. There is, I can think of places in Pickering where industrial estates have been added onto at the end along residential areas where there are driveways backing onto these roads that aren't as robust, should we say, as the one on Rickle Drive. And although I did have to send, I didn't attend the planning for the office site with a conflict of interest, so I'm not as probably up to speed with the rest of the councillors on this. We are looking at what is in front of us and what the highways position is. I welcomed Peter's suggestion that we do get highways to go to the appeal and possibly put forward some of our angst, if you like, about the fact that it's a mixed site. But they haven't actually said they're opposed to it. And in planning terms, pre all this that has gone on in the last few months, we would have looked at this and our statutory consultees, and if they hadn't have had any issues, we would have had to come up with planning reasons as to why we weren't going to approve this. I do welcome that the residents have a chance and that this planning committee can give some steerage towards it, and that we will have representative at the appeal with highways as there as well. But I think we should look at this as the application in front of us as if we were determining it, and that's my view. Thank you.
Just for clarity, what I was suggesting is actually us to employ a third party highways consultant in the circumstances, given that highways have clearly set out that they don't consider it to be an issue. We wouldn't normally look to highways to provide that support. So I would be looking to contract an independent third party highways consultant. We've done exactly that on a number of occasions in a sort of similar situation before.
Yeah. Oh, Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I think we should move this forward, and I think we're all going in one direction, as you might say. My feeling is, if this came to the committee today, I would be looking for refusal purely on the grounds of highways. I think the right course on behalf of the residents is to put that to the inspector, and prior to that we should have a report from a third party independent highways engineer, hopefully stating it's the wrong development in the wrong place as far as the roads are concerned, and then we can decide where we go from there, and it gives a clear view what happens to the site in future, whether it becomes all 100% residential or 100% commercial. So I think we should say that we're going to refuse it, and I think we pass that to the inspector.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Cross. Now, we are here to look at all of the conditions. There is a significant number of conditions, and I need to know if any member has any other issues with regard to conditions, because they may all be relevant in the appeal situation.
Can I follow up on that? So clearly, if there are specific things in conditions that you've got to take issue with, then clearly let us know. If there are more general issues around the conditions or things that you consider that officers have not picked up on, we're not looking to you to provide all the specific wording for the conditions or anything of that nature, but if there's general issues that you wish for us to raise or wish for us to look at further, then please relate those to us.
Well, I've got some. So, the noise limitations, they are quite tight and they are really important if the inspector decides that commercial use for the site and the application is appropriate. And it's really important that we make sure that residential amenity is not affected by adverse noise conditions. I know they seem to be quite tight. I know there's no requirement for an acoustic fencing or all that, and that will depend on what the use of that commercial land is. And I'm only saying this because we've got to cover all the bases. So that's the first thing. The second thing is with regard to lighting, because we are on the fringes of North York Moors and they do have a dark skies policy, and I think we are incumbent on us to make sure that that is compliant with that dark skies policy so that we don't get lots of light up into the sky. Vehicle movement times at the moment are set with nothing between 11 AM and 7 AM. I think that that's I would have preferred to have seen from 10 p.m. to 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I think 11 o'clock, and that's a bit late in the evening. Most people are trying to go to bed, especially if they've got work in the morning. So I'm thinking about that. The other thing is drainage, and there are a number of projects being carried out by Yorkshire Water in my division where the sewer has been uncombined. So I would like to see any new residential properties and drainage be uncombined. So only the sewage feeds into the foul water system, and only that, and the surface water runoff from properties and roads, etc., is attenuated so that we don't have that extra impact on on Yorkshire Water's sewage system, because then it's only dealing with sewage rather than the combined extra capacity that would happen in heavy downfall or whatever, if you understand where I'm coming from. Yeah. I don't know whether anybody's got anything else. Councillor Baker.
I welcome number 62, the NEAP on the site, but I'm concerned it's rather tucked away out of, I mean, presumably it's a children's play area. It's sort of behind one of the commercial units. I would like to see that moved elsewhere if necessary, so that it is, so parents can, can see it from the road or from their houses. It's not behind, because as we know.
Would that go to DOCO?
It would. What I was really thinking though was that realistically those matters will be dealt with through the reserve matters application anyway. So whilst it's something that's useful for us to consider, actually in terms of the outline, it's probably not particularly relevant.
That's fine.
I did forget one thing, and that was that any residential stroke commercial unit fits with the stone face vernacular, because I think that's really important. I mean, Helmsday is predominantly stone built, and it's really important, particularly with what we've already got, that it is sympathetic and fits in. Has anybody got anything else? Right. So I suppose the next question is, what would our decision be? Would we allow it as it is or not? So I need a proposer and a seconder. Councillor Burr.
I propose that we refuse this application.
Do we need grounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify then, just for the, I suppose, purposes of the record, that it would be a vote that members, had there been the decision maker, would have been minded to refuse on grounds of highway safety.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burr.
Question. Thank you, Chairman. That obviously our officers will be relaying our concerns about, the residential and the commercial not mixing. So we've said that in the brief, the reasons for the refusal, but it has a wider implications which will all come through at the hearing.
I think what's being asked is what grounds members would have refused on. Obviously, if members had wanted to, obviously I've made a note of highway safety being the principal,
Yes.
and then this other bit being ancillary, and I think officers may want to make representations. Should members have been minded to add a reason for refusal based on the commerciality? I think we may have been wanting to give you some advice around assessing in accordance with the development plan, about it being an allocated site. So I suppose it depends. Goes sort of the strength of reasoning, and if members would have wanted to have an additional reason for refusal, I think officers may want to effectively make representations to you in terms of the balance and in terms of defensibility of additional. I'll use the word grounds just for ease. Obviously, there'll just be the representations being made.
Okay, well, thank you very much for explaining that. But given that this opinion of this committee is as it is, and obviously our officers have listened to everything that we've said, we will entrust them to deliver our views to the inspectorate. Thank you.
Am I right in thinking that any member can actually express those views either in writing to the planning inspectorate and indeed at the appeal hearing?
Absolutely. Any third party or second party, I suppose, has the opportunity to make representation to the appeal. 15th of July.
Councillor Napton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So obviously our recommendation would be for refusal on the grounds of highway safety. Do we need to embellish that? Do we need to say, you know, we do not believe that heavy goods vehicles should be travelling through what is effectively now a residential street, or do we just leave it at that?
No, I think we've captured all of those issues, and I think we've got a whole understanding of members' position on that. My inclination for the record is that it would simply set out on road safety grounds.
Thank you.
So just before we go to the vote, is everybody happy with the conditions and the bits that I've raised, the reasons for refusal? The officers have got it all written down. So it's been moved. So we'll go to the vote because it's been moved and seconded for refusal. That would have been the opinion of the committee if it had been before us. So those four. That's 5-4. Those against? Abstentions. So the recommendation would have been for refusal, and it will now go on to the inspector with whatever evidence we need to present to the inspector to support that position, and then it'll be up to the inspector to make the decision. So moving swiftly on, I'm going to move on to item 5, which is application. You don't have to stay if you don't wish to. Application ZE24/00588/MOUT, erection of up to 140 dwellings and associated infrastructure with all matters reserved except access at Keldhead Farm, Middleton Road, Pickering. We do have a speaker on this that's the objector, so we'll hear the officer's presentation and then I'll ask the objector to come forward. Ashley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as mentioned, this is an outline application for construction of up to 140 dwellings with access only considered. So similar to the previous case, the application has been appealed on non-determination and is being presented today to gain a view from members on the proposal and the direction of defence that officers should take at the appeal. In terms of updates, it is noted that the report does not contain a discussion of the agricultural land classification, although it was considered during the life of the application. The submitted information classes the land as grade 3A, which is in line with Natural England's mapping. The site is therefore considered to be best and most versatile, albeit at the lowest grade. Rydale Local Plan Policy SP17 indicates that land resources such as best and most versatile agricultural land should be protected from irreversible loss. Proposals for major development coming forward on sites that are not allocated for development, which would result in the loss of best and most versatile land, will be resisted unless it can be demonstrated that the use proposed cannot be located elsewhere and that the need for the development outweighs the loss of the resource. Given the Council's housing land supply position, as outlined in the report, it is not considered that the loss of the BMV land in this case would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme. So moving on to the presentation. The site is located on the north side of Middleton Road at the northwestern end of Pickering. The site is bordered to the north and west by hedgerows with open field beyond. To the east is residential development and to the south a single dwelling and a care home. The site currently accessed from 3 points along Middleton Road serving each individual strip field. Gaps in the hedgerow allow for access through the 3 fields. Next slide, please. This slide shows a broader location of the site in relation to Pickering. The site is outside of, but adjacent to the development limits and lies within the fringe of the moors area of high landscape value. A footpath connecting Middleton and Pickering runs along the southern boundary of the site. Next slide, please. So here we have a plan which shows the approximate layout for different uses within the site. Layout is not being considered, however, the plan does give an idea of how the site could be laid out. The access, which is being considered, is shown at number 4 at the southern end of the site. The plan shows a circular route around the site with the light green areas indicating the location of dwellings. An attenuation basin is shown at number 9 at the southwest corner. Retained hedges and trees are indicated by numbers 2 and 3. Public open space and an equipped play area are shown at the northern end at 1, 5 and 7. It should be noted that comments from the Council's urban designer requested some alterations to this layout, including bringing houses closer to the road to foster better neighbourhood connection. However, this would be an issue for reserved matters stage should the proposal succeed at appeal. Next slide, please. So this plan gives an indication of the density of dwellings proposed across the site. The purple area indicates the higher density which decreases as you move west towards the countryside. And as with the previous plan, this is indicative at this stage. Next slide, please. So moving on to the photos, this first one shows the dwellings to the east of the site on Northway. Next slide, please. This slide shows a view from the southern corner of the site along Middleton Road, and the proposed access is located just beyond that lamppost on the right. Next slide, please. This view looking north across the site from the southern corner. And this photo was taken from approximately halfway across the southern boundary of the site and shows footpath and the care home, which is to the south of the site. Next slide. This is a view looking north across the site from the existing access to the middle field. The proposed access is, just to the right of that hedgerow on the right-hand side. So this is a view looking north across the site from the southwest corner. And then just panning, this one shows northeast across the site. From the southwest corner, you can just make out the houses on Northway there. And looking across the frontage of the site from southwest corner. So this image was taken from Google Street View just to give an idea of the wider residential context. This shows the existing access to Northway, and the yellow arrow points to the proposed access to the site. And finally, another Google image looking towards the site from the western end of Middleton Road, just again to give you some context on how visible the site will be. So in summary, it's considered that the development would not result in adverse impacts which would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the MPPF. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We do have a speaker. The objector is, bear with me, Mr. Spook? Spouge, beg your pardon, sir. Do come forward. You will have 5 minutes. It is the green button on the microphone, and I will try and give you an audible reminder when you've got 30 seconds left.
I am Jeremy Spouch. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I can't speak in the expert terms, which others have, and the committee and your officers will and will understand, so I'll be plain and fairly blunt, I hope. These comments are mine, though I think they'll chime to a great extent with those of the other 30-odd objectors. And I sincerely hope that everybody has read all those objections, because there's a lot in there that I can't cover now because I've only got 5 minutes. I'm here, by the way, because I got the short straw. I've not been elected. I was just the first to sign in. I'll start with two challenges. Well, the first is a fairly simple one, and we've gone around the houses a little bit on it in the previous matter. And that is, who gets to make decisions about these things? I think regardless of the law and the politics, it's utterly wrong that the decision is out of the hands of local interests. You, me, us, our councils, our councillors, shouldn't be with the inspector, shouldn't have got to this stage. I think it's shameful. But who does get to make decisions when whole new bits of our town are going to be built? I don't think it should be developer driven. I really don't. The second one, or the second question, which I think is worth addressing and having in your mind, is who really understands what sustainable development is? I'm not an expert on it. I doubt anybody here is. It'd be very hard to put a finger on it and say that's sustainable and that's not. So I will hope to make the case that I don't think this really is. I don't think it fits the criteria. I think it's opportunistic. I think it's a grab for a developer-driven opportunity, and I would urge the committee to, if it were considering it for approval, not to. So moving on, if there's a way of persuading the appeal to say no, I think you should try and say no. Moving on to the issue of sustainability. If you strip out all the flowery, professional, fashionable, value-laden, plain slippery and tendentious language in the concepts for the application documents, what we're going to get, if it goes ahead, is a field. It's just a field at the moment, but it's going to be full of 140 very ordinary mass developer products. I see little to suggest in the application materials provided by the developer that there's any real attention to anything special in the way of heating, energy efficiency, water conservation, solar gain, advanced materials, methods of construction, integration with the neighbourhood, so on and so forth. It's just not there. It's just ordinary stuff. The development will make Pickering 5 or 10% bigger in one big step, depending on what metrics you apply. It's going to have somewhere between 5 and 10% more houses, more people, more cars, more traffic, and so on and so forth. This is simply too much. You can't keep on adding 5 or 10% steps and say it's sustainable, because it isn't. Especially as it will probably get even bigger than that, because this development, a development like this, will attract new settlement and not fill a local need that I can see. There will self-evidently be proportionately more traffic movement and congestion. You try driving up Hungate sometime. Water supply, that's not a problem, but this year might open our eyes. Sewage treatment, sewage spills, and natural water quality. And that's quite an issue in the national press at the moment, starting in our area. There'll be more air pollution, more noise, more light pollution. It is self-evident. More town means more stuff. There'll be serious changes to the appearance and amenity of the town. The western edge of the town will extend quite markedly. That's a big lump, 6.3 hectares, with, again, self-evident impacts on landscape and local visual environment. And I noticed the comment was made that this was an area of high outstanding natural landscape, and there'll be an impact on amenity, just general pleasure in being in the place. Hundreds of people will be affected by this. You can't neglect it. Whole streets of neighbours just didn't buy into that. They're going to be affected. Everybody on Middleton Road is going to be affected. I would point out, just about finishing, that were this to be being considered by the committee, in the normal way of things, it's outside the local plan. It wouldn't have been planned for here. So I don't think it comes up. I don't think the balance is actually sustainable. I think maybe an error there. All the little bits okay on their own, add them up. I don't think it's sustainable development that should be challenged. Thank you.
Time, sir. Thank you.
Do I need to press it, turn it off?
Thank you. Do officers wish to respond?
Okay, so I suppose a couple of things here from our point of view. First thing I'd comment on the indicative plans. So the indicative plans are there to kind of illustrate that the developer is saying that the number of units that they're proposing will fit on the site, bearing in mind the other necessary constraints of sustainable urban drainage, of looking at of myself and Aisling have looked at the issues around the relationship of the site to the wider countryside, particularly with regards to that eastern boundary, and noting what would we think should be a requirement of looking at a buffer along that boundary and breaking up the development form on the eastern boundary. So we're satisfied that the illustrative plans, indicative plans, sufficiently show that the development would fit in the site. That's all they're really there for, realistically. Clearly, the proposal before you is an outline application with access only to be considered. So the access is would be a given if at that point. Issues around sustainability. Sustainability is an academic question from that point of view. Clearly, we could spend a considerable amount of time, as suggested by our speaker, looking at all of those different elements that contribute to that and coming to a conclusion in terms of sustainability. From our perspective and from the local plan perspective, and notwithstanding the issue of it not being an allocated site, but from a sustainability point of view, we're realistically looking at some broad brush concepts around location. So Pickering is a location where there are schools, there is fuel stations, there are other services that are readily available and within walking distance. So it's one of those issues that we would look at from a fairly broad brush approach. Clearly, we would also be looking at matters around drainage, which is always a really significant concern. Matters around the sort of proximity of the site to in terms of the open countryside, ecology, and these sorts of matters. So they're broad brush concepts that we would look at. And I as I say, I don't take exception with our speaker in terms of whether or not one would conclude that any, frankly, development is truly sustainable from that point of view. The other matters that we're looking at today and the balancing act that we're looking at is around the 5-year land supply. So the published land year 5-year land supply is 0.8 of a year. That's not a great position. So we're looking at this application, and there frankly will be others coming before you in the coming months, but we're looking at this application in terms of whether or not, bearing in mind we don't have a 5-year land supply, and the fact that the inspector will give that issue significant weight in this discussion, we're looking at that as to whether or not the other matters that are raised in the local plan, because we're effectively setting aside the issue of it not being an allocated site. So we're looking at, therefore, at other matters that are set out in the local plan, because it's perfectly reasonable for us to be looking at those other issues in terms of whether it is otherwise compliant with local plan policies. In terms of the lack of an allocation, we are effectively setting that to one side. We're looking at it otherwise in terms of whether or not this is, in those broad brush conceptual terms, a sustainable location for this type of development. And I'll leave that there.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. It's just a question. I know that we got a date for the inspector for the previous application. Do we have a date for this?
No.
Okay, and if we do get a date, will it be will it be held in a presumably a local place? I mean, will it be? He will be coming here. It won't be an online where he'll just. Yeah, that's good. And the same will stand for that. There will be allowed second, third party involvement. At the. That's fine. I just want it on record. And also, one of my question was, it wasn't in the papers that we had about the agricultural land, but thank you for giving that information at the beginning of this. Thank you.
So we're in a similar position than we were previously. We've got to look at the conditions if the inspector decides that this is acceptable. Can I just pick up, because I think we need to be really clear about whether we can rely on the plan in terms of numbers, and that you said we can't. We definitely can't. The plan would have been reviewed and was being reviewed and didn't get as far down the thing. So we're now in a situation where we don't have a 5-year land supply. We have a large target of housing requirement from the government. We're going to be in a really sticky position to try and defend whether we should or shouldn't be doing this. Is that my?
Okay, I'll change that angle a little bit, because we're not in a position to try to argue that we've got a 5-year land supply and therefore we shouldn't be having any development beyond the scope of allocations. We're not in that position. You can still reasonably argue that this isn't an acceptable site if that's, if that's where you wish to go. What we're not, as I say, what we're not going to be able to advise you is that we can try to defend our 5-year land position. The information that we have in front of us today is our most up-to-date assessment of the numbers, which, as I say, is 0.8 of a year. So we're in a very weak position from that point of view. What we also can't do at this stage is to effectively try to play some sort of a beauty pageant game with other sites, because we can't put that, well, it's not as though we've got 8 applications in front of you today, 1,000 units, and therefore, pick and choose your 500 and we'll see where we go. We're not in that frame. So for me, and I think for officers more widely, what I'm looking for is, A, do you accept the principle of housing development on this site? Yes or no? If it's a no, why? And then we can look at those matters as to whether or not those particular issues we feel we can defend. And we're back into our sustainability argument, I suppose, in as much as, we're looking at the question of best and most versatile land. We're looking at the road network and the highways issues. We're looking at questions around drainage and, the relationship to the open countryside. I know issues around the distance between Pickering and Middleton have been discussed, and whether or not this is coalescence from that point of view and therefore potentially harmful. I think whenever we see it, I haven't yet to see a housing development that I would hand on heart say wasn't harmful in some way. The question is this a suitable site to provide housing effectively for local people? And I accept there are discussions around net inward migration and such like. However, the 5-year land supply is about the housing need for Rydale or for the local plan.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's just a clarification question of Mr. Jones, actually. Just so I'm absolutely clear in my head, this application's same as the previous one. We are just looking at outline here, aren't we? And reserve matters will come further down the tracks. Thank you.
Which again, if members, we can go through the members' call-in process. If there are issues to be raised around that, clearly we can note whether there's a general feel for the meeting in terms of a matter coming back to members, and then we would discuss that with you at the pertinent time.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I think the important thing to me here is that this is actually outside the plan for Pickering. And as mentioned, it will make Pickering.
Sam, can I just stop you? We're not in debate yet. We're asking
Oh,
questions.
sorry.
Sorry. Right. So I am going to ask Councillor Burr. You look like you're going to ask a question.
Thank you so much. I was very late there, but I will ask the question because near to my patch, we've just lost an appeal and it was on the land supply. So I just want to be clear, how far are off we with the land supply, or how near are we with the land supply? I'm just not sure, and I know it's a moving target, but I think that would be quite helpful for me to understand where we are with our land supply. Thank you.
It's 0.8 of a year. We're an awfully long way away from having a 5-year land supply. Now, what I can't give you is, if you will, the risk profile of different sites. So clearly, as we go over through time, and hopefully we're looking at approving sites, that profile will change, and we will both have an understanding of the overall land supply, bearing in mind there's an additional complexity to this. Discussion around the disaggregation of the numbers. At the moment, we have a number for the local plan. We also have a number for North Yorkshire. There's clearly a question in the number for North Yorkshire as to whether or not we should be disaggregating to the local plan areas. Now, that doesn't change the position in terms of there being a necessity to up the ante, if you will, in terms of housing supply for Rydale and the local plan specifically. There's also then a question as we start to move forward with the new local plan, bearing in mind that will be informed by the most up-to-date evidence, but it would also include a strategy. So we will at some point over the next couple of years have a housing strategy which looks at the geographical distribution of housing. We as officers will then be able to use that to look, well, effectively to defend applications that are coming in smaller settlements. Probably will be that scenario. Certainly for larger proposals in smaller settlements. It would be likely that places like Pickering will still fall into that strategy. And so there will still be significant pressure in terms of the housing strategy for North Yorkshire for development in those sorts of locations. I can't hand on heart today say that is the case, simply because we're not there yet. So the result of that is we defer or step all the way back to where I started from, in terms of we have a local plan position for what is the target? 500, I forget what the target is now, 375 or 359 per year, and we're aiming at 0.8 of a year at the moment. I've frankly never been in a position whereby we were so far behind that curve. I've always been in a position whereby we're getting argument over, well, it's not 5 years, it's 4.8. You know, it's usually that sort of scenario whereby we're totally then at liberty to get into that argument in the appeal process. That is not the case. Because we're nowhere near the 5-year land supply, we are simply not going to enter into that argument because we will go down for costs massively.
Thank you for that abysmal summing up.
All I'm going to say is I did try. I really tried to get the local plan updated before we got to this position, but it didn't happen. And I'm really sorry about that, but I did try. Right, I'll move it into debate. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah. Thank you. As we've heard, there has been a whirlwind of activity recently which has created the perfect storm in planning, and we find ourselves completely exposed due to the lack of a 5-year land supply. As a member of the planning committee, as members of the planning committee, we've always keep an open mind. We are told to look at all the information and give weight to policies we feel are important. We discuss, debate, and sometimes we don't always agree. We now find ourselves in a position where we have to give considerable weight to the fact that we don't have a 5-year land supply. The local plan for Rydale was worked on for many years, and there is information in there that has come from the residents, parish and town councils, those who know their patch and contributed. The results of this are still there in black and white, albeit carrying less weight as it once did. Pickering's contribution was not prescriptive to the local plan. We have not been adverse to development. In fact, we have seen huge developments to the north and south of Pickering, as well as industrial development to the east. We have contributed what was asked of us. Up until now, there has been no development to the west because Section 3 of the local plan, the principles, mentions safeguarding of views towards and across the town into the moors. Ensure development is sensitive and responsive to the historic character of the town and its setting in the wider landscape. Avoid coalescence with Middleton. Preservation of strip fields, and although I don't think this is strip field, it is of good and possibly outstanding agricultural land. I would also like to add that this is outside the development limits. And although we have to give most of the weight that we haven't got a 5-year land supply, all these are particularly mentioned in the local plan, as no other area in Pickering is. It was very much debated and discussed at town council, because I was involved, that it was very important to keep. In fact, I've been trying to think of a village as close to a town as Middleton is to Pickering, and within Rydale, and I can't. It's a stone's throw away, and it is important to both people and residents of Middleton and Pickering that we're kept apart. Although I grew up in Middleton and was drawn to the bright lights of Pickering like a moth to a flame, we are separate identities. And I cannot, in all conscience, ignore this document just because the goalposts have not only been moved, they've been packed away and put in a shed. I will mention this in the public domain, and as public consultation has occurred, but there are 4 other sites within Pickering that developers have worked up, and I know this is not for this meeting, but I can assure members that we will continue to deliver our share of housing. But these green and glorious fields, which have particular mention in the local plan, is not the place to do it. Therefore, I cannot support the recommendation we have in front of this committee, even though officers have given a very good reason as to why. I will be keen to listen to other members and have their say, but I will wish to speak again on the minutiae of stuff going forward, with your discretion, Chair. Thank you. Are you done?
Councillor Napton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I really appreciate what Joy says and about the reference to the Rydale plan and the issues with Middleton and keeping the residents separate. But I also listened obviously to the objector and their concerns about sustainability, and I think his list of sustainable issues are pretty much the same on any development, the drainage, the site access, etc., etc. So I appreciate that, but it's very difficult to really say why this site would not be sustainable as against any other development that we probably pass, and obviously that will come out of the detail when we see what is proposed in detail as far as the properties are concerned, solar, water, etc., etc. So we're not seeing that at the moment, so that judgment of whether it's sustainable is probably too early to make that call. I appreciate that the site is towards Middleton and that does cause some concern. However, it has good access. The site is adjacent to Pickering, so it's not stuck out between Middleton and Pickering. So at this point, as far as outline is concerned, I suppose my position would be, if we were considering it as to whether it was approved or refused, I think on that basis, I would be supporting outline permission, Chairman.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think all of us who've sat on planning committees for any length of time have had to adjudicate on many housing applications across our broad and green acres of North Yorkshire that we're all fiercely protective of. And a lot of us, some of us here represent, rural communities who've had to take an awful lot of housing. And we are in a really difficult position, particularly in Rydale, with the housing supply. Obviously, we haven't got the new North Yorkshire local plan yet. I've taken great cognizance of what both the Speaker and very much the local member has said. And obviously, I've looked at it from both sides. But I always look at reasons to support, reasons to refuse. I am struggling to find any incontrovertible reasons to object to the application at this stage. So I will listen to the rest of the debate, but I am minded to support the recommendation for approval.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. The thing that really concerns me is, once again, we've got good arable land being removed from our arable land supply. And I get about the housing supply, but I think one of the things we do need to look at is our arable land supply. And this appears to be good arable land. In the pictures, that was, I presume it wasn't this year, but it was certainly an arable crop that was on the pictures. And that is the thing that really does concern me. Added together with the fact that it's, however you're saying, getting close to joining up with the village. So I find I'm a bit uncomfortable about this application. If I put my hand on my heart.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I think the interesting thing that's been said and that swings it for me is that this is not in the local plan. You know what I mean? And I've driven to Pickering many times, and there is plenty of houses there. And I think we all listened to Linda Marfitt at the planning this week at the Teams meeting, and we have 1,700 sites that have been put forward just recently, and lots of them have been speculative sites, and I believe this is a speculative site. You know what I mean? That they're hoping for a quick win. You know what I mean? And it's probably not in the right place. It does mention in the report there is problems with the road there. It's outside the local plan. We talked about drainage, etc. Did we talk about doctors, dentists, schools, shops? Did we see 140 families sleeping on the streets in Pickering? I don't think I've ever seen anybody, there's one or two in Filey as well, believe it or not. But I mean, is there really such a shortage in Pickering that, as well, on top of all the other sites that they've got, that they need to have this site developed? And that would be my theory. So I shall vote for refusal. Thank you.
Councillor Burr.
Thank you. Yeah, I've listened to all what the other councillors have said, and there's a lot of weighing up that you've got to do with planning. And next door to me, we lost an appeal, but the land wasn't great. And next door to me are now 75 houses. That's fine. People are living there. So there was a need. However, you have got to listen to local members. You know, the application that I was talking about previously, they didn't want it, people didn't want it, but it got approved. That's life. But with Middleton, I think we've got a prime example of out of the local plan, and you can say development plan, you can say whatever you want, but a lot of time and effort did go into that. And I think that we need to respect that. So on this occasion, I will be supporting our local member and I won't be supporting this application. Thank you.
Councillor Napton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And just to come back on the speculative aspect of this, I think that speculative applications will come forward when you have an insufficient land supply, because that's the offer. They're saying you haven't got an insufficient land supply within your local plans, and therefore we offer this because of that fact. So that's where I'm at with it, is unfortunately we haven't got a robust land supply, and therefore we are now exposed to speculative. So speculative, tick, that's fine. And then it's outside the plan. Well, yeah, it will be outside the plan because we haven't got sufficient land supply. So those two boxes are ticked for me. The site has good access. It has a footway, which is important, so you can walk into Middleton or walk into Pickering. So those things, I think, make it sustainable in whatever you want to think of as sustainable. So with that in mind, I would like to propose that we I'm trying to think of the wording now because of the situation we're in, but we propose that we would have recommended approval of this application, if whatever the words are for these circumstances.
Greatly conflicted, and I have huge regard for what the local member has said, and it's very important, but I do think there is still a delineation between Pickering and Middleton, even with this development. The difficulty is we cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply. We are on really, really difficult grounds to say no. We can't, we've got no grounds to say no because we just do not have the allocated land. We can't rely, I know we've got 1,700 sites, Sam. None of them have been assessed for suitability. We can't give it any weight in the local plan because we're not far enough down the local plan to give it any weight. And we are really stuck between a rock and a hard place. And as much as it grieves me, because this may not have been where we wanted land housing, I don't think I have an option but to support the officer's position to say this is where they'll have to go. Now, before I go to the vote, again, we're back to the situation with conditions if it's approved, because the inspector will expect us to have the conditions in place. So would members want to give any more steer on what conditions there'll be? Yeah.
So we've not penned conditions for this report. If there are areas that, and I mentioned around the idea of a buffer to the western edge of the development previously, and these sorts of things, clearly we will be setting out a list of conditions to be put forward in the process of the appeal. They will cover all of the, if you will, standard matters. So most of those things are with reference to statutory requirements for reserved matter submissions and timescales and such like. We will then have a series of conditions that cover the technical matters. So that will be the highways issues, the drainage issues, and sort of those standard blocks of matters that we would deal with on a you know, a day-to-day basis. If there are matters that you consider need to be addressed by officers because they would make what you consider to be an otherwise unacceptable development acceptable, then we need to understand what those are. So it's those sorts of things that I'm kind of looking for and looking to you to provide us with advice on. If there are matters, as I say, that you consider need to be addressed in order to make what you consider to be otherwise unacceptable acceptable.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening to me and considering things, because I know it isn't easy, and I know we're going to be in this situation for many months to come. We're going to be getting even more harder decisions, I dare say. And I mean, I was hoping that we would let the developers know that these hard decisions that wouldn't normally be made will be made, but the lack of the land year, the 5-year land supply, does not mean the green light to build anywhere. I hope they understand that, and we will, as best we can, robustly defend our green and pleasant land. As I said, I know Councillor Cross did make the point that, you know, we have enough houses in Pickering. We don't actually, and we are open to development. Well, yes, sorry, yeah, yeah, and we have taken our bit, and we will continue to do so, because we, you know, Pickering, we've got high houses and low wages, and we do need more affordable more than anything. But I'm digressing. I wanted to actually put this to the officers. If it is minded that the inspector does approve this, I would just like to say, because of the situation of the site, I think it's important that it's treated, what's the word, a little more gently than it might have been with throwing up houses in red. Yeah, sympathetically. I think we, when we look at, we are on the edge of the North Yorkshire Moors. We have Helmsley further down the road, that's dual planning. We have Thornley Dale the same, and if anyone's driven on the A170 and coming into Thornley Dale from Scarborough, you've seen the sympathetic houses there, the stone houses, and so also on the right hand side of the A170 going into Helmsley. And I think that it should be treated with respect, this site. We are losing, or we will likely to lose, good agricultural land. It is very much a nice vista as you come in from the west, and you look at the fields that are rising up along that area, and that we pay. I know the MPPF is often being updated, but it's often with stuff that residents don't necessarily, and house buyers don't necessarily want. We want to see some environmental, and not just a nod to the environment. I mean, so the air source, ground source heat pumps, solar panels, electric charging points, something that the developer does other places in the country, and I would like to see the good quality housing built on here, and not necessarily the full capacity that has been mentioned of the 140. I think that piece of land that has been singled out in the local plan, not to be developed, should be treated with the utmost respect and care. Thank you.
Could I, just a couple of matters. So clearly where we are looking at character, that's in the local plan. So looking at the relationship of the development to its environs, and I think you're right, particularly because of the relationship between Middleton and the site, and the appearance of the development, therefore, from the road frontage, that there are definitely opportunities from that point of view. Bear in mind, this is an outline. So we've got to be a little bit careful as to how we approach that issue in the appeal, because we're not considering those matters. Clearly, we as officers are in a position to be in discussion with the developer, and we can certainly relate, you know, if that's the feeling of the meeting, we can certainly relate those matters back to the developer. It's up to them then what they do with that and how they present themselves and how they present that proposal. If I may, I'll just take a little step back to the 5-year land supply question. So I think we have a situation whereby the objectively assessed needs for housing for Pickering, and I say Pickering, but really conflate that with Rydale, because it's a plan, it's a plan number, not a Pickering number. If we were in a situation whereby let's say it was 4 years, 4 years supply that we had, and we've been pushed into a position by the government's methodology, and as a result fallen well below that. If that were the case, then I'd be more minded to follow Councillor Cross's examination in terms of the needs for Pickering. I think because of where we are, actually, the objectively assessed need from the local plan says we're not producing enough housing for the people of Pickering, let alone the objectively assessed need or the government's assessment for Rydale, for the Rydale plan area as a whole. So I think because of where the numbers are, I would be concerned. I don't think I could defend that position, I suppose, is my point, that if that was the view of the meeting.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I think the other thing, when I read through it, I didn't like, is we have this term and it doesn't mean anything, and it calls it affordable housing, because what we've got is we've got this low wage economy, as Joy has said, and we have a low wage economy on the coast in Scarborough, as the gentleman in the corner will confirm. And not everybody lives in Thornton, Liddale, or one of these Kirby Moorside nice villages. And those are the people that we need, and those are the people that are struggling with this housing crisis that we've got. And what they're going to do is they're going to build 30% or 35% affordable housing. We need social housing, and until we start addressing that problem, we're wasting us times on planning. You know what I mean? We are wasting us time. You know what I mean? People, there's a shortage of houses for ordinary working people, and this will not solve that problem. That's all I want.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief because I'm conscious we've debated this for some time now. And just touched on Sam's point, as Chair of the Housing Scrutiny Committee, we are one of the few local authorities who are actually building 500 houses. I know that's a drop in the ocean, but I think in the present environment that is to be commended going forward. But that's not a matter for today. I just wanted to concur with the Chair's comments earlier. I won't repeat them. We are in a very weak position here. We're behind the 8 ball with this one. And so, you know, I've made my comments previously. I'm not sure whether you formally seconded it, did you, Chair? If you didn't, I would well, I'm going to say if not, I'm happily to formally second Councillor Napton's proposal, that whatever the phraseology, the word is that we are doing today, that had we been sitting as a normal planning committee, we would be approving that. So I'm happy to second that. It's with a bit of a heavy heart, if I'm honest, and the devil will be in the detail. But I think the local member has very eloquently, you know, put her views across for when we do get to the reserve matter. The detail reserve matter. Sorry, yeah, it's been a long morning. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and presumably you'll move the vote.
Well, I hadn't got to the point of seconding it because there's one or two things in the conditions which I just want to get there, really. So it is about the coalescence with Middleton. I think we've now got to protect the remaining parcels of land between Pickering and Middleton so that there isn't that coalescence into creating effectively a conurbation between Middleton and Pickering. That might be the wrong terminology, but there you go. It's with a large site of 140 houses, we need to be really sure that we can accommodate all the bins that are going to come down the line, and that's down to North Yorkshire providing, what is it now, 4 bins? It has to be, we have to have that room there. Drainage, I'm going to come back to what I said on the previous one. I don't like combined sewers. I think the sewage needs to be dedicated and surface water is attenuated so that we don't have that pressure on the utilities. Lighting, again, we're on the fringes of the North York Moors. I think we need to make sure we're compliant with dark skies requirements from the North York Moors or standards from the North York Moors. Highways. Now, we have not got to this, all right, because we didn't really see the relationship between that triangle where you come from one side of Middleton and from the Pickering side off the 170. But I really think, because that little lane is very narrow, there is scope to make one of those one way so that you don't have that awkward interaction, particularly on the little lane coming off the 170, where you've got two cars that can't pass one another. I'm pushing my luck. I know I'm pushing my luck, but but I think the scope there to make that a safer option. But I'll leave that with you.
Well, if I may, we do have a commentary from the highways officer. Now this isn't comprehensive because they following our discussion previously, they have had a quick look at this. So they basically, I'm going to blast it again, can't read. So there wasn't any modelling in the traffic assessment looking at that particular issue. There's nothing in the additional traffic notes submitted by the applicant on the cut through. They note that there's no highway verge or space effectively to allow for meaningful improvements to the cut through itself. Their commentary was that they don't particularly think it would be a link that would be used. People would preferentially use the main junction. Let me finish. Not convinced that, as I say, convinced the development will significantly add traffic to this link, but we could request funding to implement a one-way if once the new site was built, the situation was monitored and showed that there was a problem here. It's one of those where no one has had to use the cut through because there's alternative routes. So it is something that we could raise in the discussions in the appeal hearing. From my perspective, it's not something that we would therefore look to raise as a reason for refusal.
No, we wouldn't hang our hat on it. But I raised it because I think it could be an issue going forward, and it might be it's that conversation with the developer and the authority, etc.
And that's exactly what I would suggest that we do, is to have that conversation now with the developer apropos of their next move. With a view to, seeing if they are willing to enter into that discussion, negotiation on that particular point.
Is everybody satisfied? It's properly debated and we've got to where we need to be, because if I'm not mistaken, Councillor Andrews, did you propose? Right, the Councillor Cross did, didn't he? Councillor Cross proposed refusal, but I don't think it was seconded. Councillor Napton's proposed approval, and it was seconded by Councillor Taylor. So that, as far as I'm concerned, is where we are. We have a properly constituted proposal for approval with the proposal from Councillor Knapp and the seconding from Councillor Taylor. I don't think we've got anything else, and that's what we've got to take because that's what came in first. But that's already in. That's already done. So that's what I've got to take first. Sorry, Lindsay, but that's where we are. All right. So it has been moved and seconded for approval. So I'd like a show of hands of those for approval. Those against? Abstentions?
Sorry, I'm sitting well and truly on the fence here.
So on the basis that it's a casting vote, my vote is for approval. Sorry, I'm really sorry. I don't really think I've got a choice.
I really. Does
that help you?
Yes.
Right.
No, but if I may, I think the discussion has been extremely helpful to us.
That is price.
So, just to say that I know Councillor Jabor raised the issue about the appeal for the Pickering site, Helmsley site, sorry. I think it's more than likely going to be here. I don't think there is the space to accommodate what is a very formal situation that needs breakout rooms and things. So I think that will probably be here and not in Pickering. Sorry, Helmsley. Forgive me, I keep saying Pickering, Helmsley. So I think that's probably more than likely going to be the place. Other than that, I don't have any other urgent business. I'll close the meeting. Thank you everybody for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair.
We need to
Yeah,
get land
so
use in the local plan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
More and more. I mean, that.
Oh, can I borrow a pen, please? I don't want to sign it in purple.
You know, it's got wheelings in. It is, yeah, sorry, I'm.
Basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll put it in